It is 2003 and a bridge is opening across the Brunswick River, Brunswick, Georgia, United States. But as we see in this picture, when the bridge was being constructed, there was actually already a bridge there. So why the new one then? Well, the original bridge has by the millennium proven to be a bit of a hindrance. It's a lift bridge requiring traffic to come to a complete stop for ships to pass underneath. The new crossing removes this traffic causing feature. But the bridge, apart from being a traffic annoyance, also has been a bit of a bump stop for shipping in the area, where cargo vessels had crashed into it at least twice. The first of the crashes is the subject of today's video, a kind of staple of a plainly difficult subject, and that is a naval-induced unexpected self-dismantling of a bridge. Today we're looking at the 1972 Sidney Lanier Bridge collapse. My name is John and welcome to Plainly Difficult. Today's video wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my Patreon, YouTube and Ko-fi members. If you want early access to the videos on this channel, then you can from just £1 a month. And as always, the links will be in the pinned comment below. Access to the port of Brunswick and a bridge. So our story begins here with the creation of a new state park. This is Jekyll Island. It's on the coast of the state of Georgia. Its story is a long one, but we won't go too much of a deep dive into that. But over the years, the island has been a plantation and the home of a very expensive private club, which interestingly was the setting for the creation of the Federal Reserve. Over the years post-World War II, the state of Georgia planned to take over the island for use as a state park. Anywho's, on the 6th of October 1947, the state of Georgia bought the island for $675,000, and although setting up as a state park initially, it would not long after be set out as its own Jekyll Island Authority. Now, the island was planned to be a bit of a tourist attraction. This would require the need of easy access. And when looking at a map, you can see a little issue, especially if you want to get to the island from nearby Brunswick. There is a 14-mile journey, roughly from here to here. But how about cutting the corner and building a bridge, eh? Well, that is exactly what would happen. Melvin E. Thompson, governor of Georgia between March 18th, 1947 and November 17th, 1948, supported a new crossing. The project would be kicked backwards and forwards over the next year or so over subsequent governors, but eventually it would be completed in 1956. So what was the bridge like? It was a 1 mile or 1.6 kilometre long 4-lane automobile crossing and would carry US Route 17. The bridge would only be around 50 feet from the surface of the water in between each span and its concrete pier. Well, there was a big ship-sized elephant in this room, and that was the port of Brunswick. The Brunswick River was the main access to the shipping port, thus any bridge would need to be tall enough for vessels to go underneath. The new bridge would combat this need by having a 250 foot or 80 metre wide section as a lift bridge. This was a section that could be lifted up to a height of 139 feet, or 42 metres when raised. It was enough for the type of shipping to navigate, but it would prove to be a bit of a challenge. Being a narrow opening, larger vessels had to align themselves with the bridge at quite a distance. This required a lot of adjustments, which of course opens up the risk of operator error. Now, on approach to the bridge, shipping has to radio the bridge operator who would initiate the lifting process. This requires the stopping of traffic with lights and barriers, and then the actual lifting of the section. Pilots are provided for the passage of vessels through the bridge. They issue orders to the ship's crew in order to successfully navigate the challenging waterway. For larger ships coming out of Oglethorpe Bay, they have to start turning almost as soon as they leave the port. This is because, as we can see here, there isn't much space to turn. As such, ships are still turning as they approach the narrow bridge's opening, as stated by the NTSB. Because of the relatively large turning radius, a ship must begin turning before it reaches the main channel. The bridge was opened in 1956 and named after Georgia-born poet Sidney Lanier. The cost in 1956 dollars for the bridge was around $8 million, which was partially funded by the federal government, but it still opened up as a toll road. For the first 16 years, the bridge was all rather uneventful, until, as always in one of these videos, it wasn't. November 1972. This is the SS African Neptune. It is a cargo ship. It is 350 feet long, or 110 metres, and weighs in at roughly 11,000 short tons. And on the 7th of November 1972, she was in the port of Brunswick collecting cargo to ship to Kenya. The ship was not cleared to leave port until the evening. In the meantime, post-loading, the ship's control gear and rudder were checked for its operational readiness. At around 21:18, 2 pilots boarded the SS African Neptune. A tugboat was provided to assist the ship out of the dock, and after which it was to manoeuvre under its own power out of the port and out into the channel. At around 21:24, there were now 5 people in the ship's wheelhouse. This included Captain Stanichko, the 2 pilots, and 2 crew members, one of whom who was at the helm. The pilot in charge released the tug at 21:37, seeing its assistance as not very helpful. The ship navigated out of the port area successfully, passing many moored barges. The bridge was radioed, and the operator began the bridge lifting process. This would result in multiple vehicles being stopped at the crossing. The lights on the bridge changed from red to green, and this was to indicate to approaching ships that the span was lifted. The pilot issued the order 10 degrees left to the helmsman. However, he was not being very effective in carrying out the order. Seeing this, the captain relieved him and ordered a replacement member of the crew to take over. Interestingly, this member who was relieved was later on thought to be drunk. The order was issued again, and the SS African Neptune began to manoeuvre. A couple of minutes after this, at 9:46 p.m, or 21:46, the ship was approaching the dangerous decision any pilot must decide upon, and that is the point of no return. This was the part of the journey in which, once past, aborting the approach to the bridge was no longer possible. Next, the order of full ahead came, followed by 20 degrees left. A ship's mate noticed that the rudder was actually at 10 degrees right. Noticing the lack of movement to the left, the pilot went back to the rudder indicator, and also seeing that the right rudder, ordered again 20 degrees left. The order then followed for hard left and full astern. They were shouted out as the ship continued to move towards the right bank of the river, and then shortly after an order to drop anchor shot out. Seeing that a collision was unavoidable, the pilot ordered at 21:48 hard right. The pilot blew the ship's whistle to try and warn the bridge of the impending disaster. At 21:49, the ship was only travelling at between 1 to 2 knots, but it was still unstoppable. Some people aboard the bridge, seeing the approaching ship, decided to hightail their way out of there. At 21:50, the ship crashed into the bridge towards the right of the lift section. This was the southern portion of the bridge. 3 sections of the bridge were dislodged from their piers and collapsed into the river. This was a 450-foot long length. Along with the bridge, 8 cars and 2 trucks were plunged into the water, and this resulted in 24 people being submerged. After the collision, crew members from the ship started throwing out lifebuoys and vests into the river. The bridge operator, after seeing the crash, called the City of Brunswick police for assistance. Quickly enough, by 10 p.m, the first responders were on the scene, with 2 Coast Guard boats arriving to help fish out the survivors from the water. 2 of the rescued were by the African Neptune's lifeboat. The injured were evacuated to hospital, but as the rescue went on, it became clear that some were dead. Initially, 1 death was reported to the press, but the number would only increase. Several boats assisted from the harbour, including the very same tugboat that had helped the ship not long before. By the next day, and the poor visibility of the night had lifted, the reported number of dead went to 5 and then finally to 10. The SS African Neptune was recovered back to Brunswick for investigation, which we'll discuss in a short while. But in the wake of the crash, the bridge would be closed to traffic. whilst repairs were undertaken. This would take 6 months to complete at a cost of approximately $1.3 million in 1972 money. But what are the cause? Well, it's time to call in a long-term friend of the channel. Hello NTSB. So, being a road, bridge floater disaster, of course these people would be involved. But it wasn't just the NTSB, the Coast Guard would also get in on the action. Regardless, both investigations would go over the ship's controls and mechanical components, as well as interviewing everyone aboard the bridge that night. Nothing concerning particularly came back about the ship itself. Everything worked as it should, meaning there shouldn't have been any issues with control of its direction. The SS African Neptune also had a very useful piece of kit, a course recorder. This took the recording of every rudder action, and would provide and prove to be vital in the investigation. It showed that the rudder was being applied to the right instead of the requested left. During the interviews with the crew, the correct orders were sent out from the pilot. So what on earth was going on? Well, it would seem that the helmsman was inputting the wrong directions, confusing left from right. But it wasn't as simple as that. The NTSB found that the rudder indicator was not the easiest to see from the wheel position, which meant the helmsman would have had difficulty getting the visual feedback required to understand how each input was actually affecting the rudder. Furthermore, it was found that the layout of the bridge meant that pilots couldn't see the rudder indicator either. As well as on top of that, it was found that orders were difficult to hear from the two different positions. This meant that mistakes couldn't be identified as easily as they should have been, thus putting the ship in a state it was at the point of no return. The Coast Guard also found that the act of turning whilst on approach was very dangerous, and in future tugboats would be used if needed to align large vessels with the channel, approaching the bridge with a sufficient stopping distance. On top of this, the stopping position of vehicles should be pushed back as to mitigate the risks of collision. But ultimately the bridge itself was the danger. The crash of 1972 was deadly, but in 1987 another collision involving the bridge would occur. No one died on that one, but it was another nail in the coffin for the bridge. In response to the second crash, the Coast Guard declared the bridge a navigational hazard, which leads us back to the early 2000s, and the opening of the new Sidney Lanier Bridge. This one is taller and better built, meaning ships don't have to thread a needle every time they need to get into Brunswick. And that's my video on the Sidney Lanier Bridge disaster. It's going to be a 4 on my scale, and this is what I've got for my root cause analysis card. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. This is a Plain Difficult production. All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Difficult videos are produced by me, John, and are currently wet and windy corner of southern London, UK. And all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and Mr. Music, play us out please.